Stage 2 is upon us, which means that it's time for some more power rankings. And we're going to start with Korea, a region that has seen a lot of action between stages. As we head into Stage 2, we've seen the Super Team get even more super than anyone could have imagined. We've seen Zeta Division shuffle pieces around to fill the violet-shaped hole in their hearts. And we're going to see a lot of new teams and a lot of old faces coming back to Korea for Stage 2. So let's talk about all of the roster moves, how it's going to affect the teams, and what I think should be the power rankings going into this and what our expectations should be, which of course means it's time for our spreadsheet. If you've not seen this spreadsheet before, these are all the teams based on their finish last time around. We're going to have tanks in green, DPS in pink, and supports in blue. We're going to talk about all of the teams, and we're going to start at the bottom as we normally do. We'll try and sort of split them into tiers in terms of which teams I think are closer to each other, and wherein there's a tier break as we go through these rankings. But we're going to start at the bottom because it's normally the easiest. A lot of these teams we see towards the bottom are all the teams that came through the qualifier. Some familiar names in terms of teams, even though there's been a lot of roster moves in and amongst them. We can take a look at the qualifier results here. Obviously, we can see maybe the big surprise in all of this is actually New Era at the top, losing out to Alt Tab. Other than that, we also get Pokerface returning, we get Vesta returning, as they always do, and we get Old Ocean coming back with a lot of those old faces we're excited to see again. Fair to say that Pokerface actually won this qualifier for what it's worth, but we'll talk about that more when we get to them. For now, if we cast our eyes across this and look at who we want to put bottom, I think, unfortunately, it's going to have to be Vesta Crew. Vesta Crew have really been a staple of OWCS Korea. They're always in it every single time. They always lose the vast majority, if not all of their games. And unfortunately for Vesta Crew, I think it's going to be more of the same. If you've watched the stream, you've probably heard me say it's always Vesterable. If you've not watched the stream, let me just tell you that's not a good thing. And this Stage 2, that's looking pretty Vesterable to me. We see a lot of changes, really. It's part of the reason why we had to go back through the open qualifier. Also, now they're finishing Stage 1. Wu-Chan is the only surviving member. Lots of new players, but I don't think this really shifts the margin at all. Some players I'm not too familiar with, like Zlim and even Search. But, well, if I have to pick bright spots here, I probably am looking at Scarlet and Zessin, but it's tough. I've really, even at my copiest, I'm really struggling to find the cope for Vesta Crew, and I think they could find themselves straight back into that qualifier for Stage 3. None of these roster moves fill me with hope. Any sort of diamond in the rough type narrative, I think this team is going to really struggle. So we won't stick on them too long because it's going to be it's going to be another rough one for Vesta. But if they've shown anything in their running OWCS over the last year and a bit, it's resilience. So we need more of that resilience from Vesta and their fans this time around. Then for the rest of the open qualifier teams, I really feel like they are just going to be our bottom 4 teams. I think there's a couple of them that maybe have a chance to punch up, but I think this bottom 4, and it's probably going to be our bottom tier, is going to be all the open qualifier teams. I think it feels really hard to see them punch up to any of the Titan teams at the top, and I think it also seems really hard, even a weakened version of Wayne that we'll talk more about later, I think they still won't be able to get that close to that team either. So I think Old Ocean, Pokerface, Alt Tab, they're all going to be in these next 3 spots. The order is just the most important thing. Now, but I think in 8th place here, I'm actually going to have to go for Old Ocean. Now, Old Ocean, I mean, they're fan favourites, right? Jaehong is back. One more ride, looking for a little bit more success. We're also seeing Becky, a very popular player. Rounded out with Probe as well, who maybe not really as notable as the other two, but coming back, as well as some familiar faces from some old Vesta Crew teams like Guthrium, Minute, and even Kiviz, who has proven to be a pretty solid mid to bottom table support player, as we've seen throughout the last couple of stages. But wow, it's fun, and there'll be moments. There'll be moments, right, where Jaehong rolls it back, he hits the big nade, he hits the sleep, where Becky pops off on Echo. We'll have these moments that'll fill us with nostalgia and hope and belief in this roster, but I think, unfortunately, it's going to be limited to moments. I can't see this team making the same headway as some of the other teams that seem a bit more well-rounded. They've had players with more recent success. So I think Wanna's team will be a fun one to watch, and you'll get those moments of nostalgia. I can promise you that. I can't see them making real inroads up the table here at all. So I think they're going to finish in 8th here. But still excited to see legends like Jaehong come back to the game for another round. Excited to see it. He'll probably only play Anna, but that's all we want anyway. So happy with that. Then we get Alt-Tab and Pokerface, who, if we remind ourselves of the qualifiers, were actually the two teams that qualified top of the qualifiers. Pokerface obviously 3-0 in them at the time. Alt-Tab maybe in many ways a bit of a surprise qualification over New Era. So I think I'm going to kind of just stick with that in terms of the rankings and put Alt-Tab and Pokerface in that order, which means obviously Alt-Tab in 7th and Pokerface up in 6th. I think when I look at the Alt-Tab squad, there's a lot of familiar faces here, right? People will remember Addo. Obviously, people will also know Irony and Opener. They both played in Stage 1 for TM and T1, respectively. Though neither of them had actually a very successful Stage 1 with those teams, still OWCS quality players, and people will, of course, remember Attack from some of those very impressive cameos on NRG Shock last year. Kilo as well returns, also another member of the NRG Shock from even further back in time. So there's a lot of good pieces to this, and I think if anything, we'll get, once we get onto Pokerface, we'll see that actually it's Irony Opener backline, as much as they received a lot of criticism in Stage 1. I think they're actually the better backline out of the two teams. But overall, hard to argue with that 3-0 in the Open qualifier. I think there's still big elements of how good are these players going to stack up against the newer generation, and it sort of becomes, do you believe in the old established talent, or do you back the newer talent? And I think on this one, I'm going to lean into the newer talent. The results seem to back up my thinking as well, so we'll go with that. Pokerface, on the other hand, they keep a lot of the key pieces. Heiser, I think, came in partway through the stage, back in Stage 1 for Pokerface, and the team looked a whole lot better when he did. They're going to have access to him this entire stage. I think Spint, Alien, Dart have all had moments where they've looked like impressive DPS, and I think when I compare this sort of the new guns of Pokerface in the tank and DPS to Alt-Tab, I think there's a real chance that they surpass him here. But the biggest problem for Pokerface is going to be in his backline, which doesn't fill me with hope or belief at all. It fills me with a lot of dread, and that'll be the big limiting factor for Pokerface. We talk a lot when we speak about Korea, when we talk about top teams in general, now often backline can be the difference maker. So there is a big concern for Pokerface in terms of how this backline can perform, and that's where the biggest worry is. That's where Alt-Tab in theory should have the advantage on paper. But I think, and there's enough other good pieces of Pokerface, and it's not like Alt-Tab are a complete squad either, or have no flaws. So I'm happy to keep Pokerface above. I think in general, this entire sort of bottom 4 teams that all are newly qualified, I think they're going to be scrapping out really in a bottom tier. I think all of these teams are within punching distance of each other. Like, I think I could see all of these teams trading results, but I think Pokerface, Alt-Tab especially seem on the stronger side of these things, and I think they'll separate themselves from those bottom 2, and we might get a repeat of our old Ocean Vesta crew battle to avoid going winless, but it should at least set us up for some pretty evenly matched games through Korea, even when we're not seeing the big heavy hitters come into play. Once we get to the top half of the table, it's probably worth reminding ourselves what's at stake for Stage 2, because Stage 2 is going to work slightly differently than Stage 1. There is still obviously direct qualification through being successful in Korea and then being successful in the Asia playoffs, but it's worth noting Crazy Raccoon, they've already bloody qualified for the Esports World Cup through winning the major out in Hangzhou, which means there's 2 other spots in Korea up for grab, as well as yet to be announced details of a last chance qualifying that will also be happening in Riyadh just before the Esports World Cup, where a lot of the teams that missed out on that direct qualification will also be sent to the last chance qualifier to have another chance to get one singular spot in that Esports World Cup OWCS Stage 2 finals. So this is where it gets a little bit important in terms of who will finish in what order here, as we don't know how many teams are going to go to the last chance qualifier just yet. You have to presume Crazy Raccoon will take one of the top spots, and then what that will mean is that in reality, out of his top 3, one will be Crazy Raccoon, 2 teams will also qualify directly, and then this 4th and 5th battle is going to be that last chance qualifier spot. Maybe there's 2 spots for him, but we don't know yet, but that's where the real battle is going to be in terms of that. So those are the sort of stakes online. In terms of who I think is going to be in this sort of 4th and 5th spot, I think that his 5th place team is going to be Wei. Wow, Wei have probably been one of the most exciting teams we saw from Stage 1. Both in terms of the success they had, upsetting some of the big dogs in Korea, and also really playing their own style. Playing a double flex support backline when lots of other teams wouldn't. Playing Sigma when nobody else bloody would. Leaning into who I use Genji and getting the most out of him. Playing ball in a lot of places as well. In general, just leaning on the strengths of some of their best players, finding a lot of success in those niches, and in general, just being a very exciting, aggressive, creative team to watch. So I think Wei won loads of fans as a result of their success in stage 1. The problem with success comes attention, and with success comes people who maybe can offer a bit of a better salary. Of course, if you don't know, WoW are an unsalaried team, unsponsored team. So what happens when an unsigned team does very well and overperforms expectations? The big boys come knocking with a paycheck. They poach the best pieces of that. And while that's a little bit sad, now we're going to see this WoW core broken apart a little bit, it is ultimately what you want to happen, right? You want these players who overperform and impress us and do so well. You want them to be offered full-time salaries, rewarded for their impressive performances. So as much as there's a bit of sadness to it, it's also what you want to happen in a healthy ecosystem. For the rest of WoW, the ones who weren't signed, who weren't poached to a bigger team, they are left to try and fill pretty big gaps. So the most notable of which is probably Who Are You, who really is just Mr. Genji. He gets it done every single time. He's elite level. He's as good as anyone else, if not the best Genji in the world. So when they were able to lean into his strength, he could do it against any of these elite teams. We often talk in Korea, especially about some of the players in the mid-table teams not being able to step up against the elite teams. Who Are You had no quarrel stepping up. He was able to go toe-to-toe with whoever he played against. Proper Pelican, he said no problem. He would go and often look like the best player in the server at the time when he was doing it as well. So a loss of that is huge for WoW. Alongside that, they've lost Peppy as well. So all the Sigma adventures are gone for WoW. It must be said that as we got later into stage 1, we did see less and less of Peppy on Sigma. In fact, in many ways, Peppy's last outing on Sigma was actually kind of getting trounced a little bit by VP and Vestala in that Sigma on Circuit Royale back in the Soup Cup. So maybe not the end to the Sigma adventures that Peppy would have been hoping for, but he's moved on to a Pacific team and has a great chance of featuring at the Esports World Cup directly through that spot instead. The players that have come in to replace these two are Jasmine and Sunjin. Both fine players. I think we talk of a OWCS caliber, yes, but we're talking mid to lower table more than anything else. I think Sunjin certainly has maybe a bit more flexibility in terms of the hero pool available to him than Who Are You did, but not even remotely close to the peaks that Who Are You was able to reach on Genji. Likewise, Jasmine, a decently rounded tank. If anything, I expect that we'll probably just see even more Milgaru this next stage, and they'll lean into him a lot more. The saving grace is they still have Ade, they still have Maka, they still have Lee Min. They've managed to keep hold of this backline that found so much success, so I really expect them to keep leaning into Anakiri wherever they can. Milgaru can still play the ball. Remember, some of the most exciting performances we saw from Wei was actually on New Queen Street with an Anakiri ball-style comp. So there are still some aspects and some great strengths that Wei have in this next stage, but really can't understate what bigger loss those two players are. And what might even become a bigger loss, the more we see it, is Gultak will be moving away from the team. Again, better opportunities available. So he's moved away. Gultak is a coach who's really sort of had his reputation increased tenfold multiple times throughout the course of stage 1 due to his success initially with Wei and of course with Nightmare at the Hangzhou Major where they beat Crazy Raccoon. So his stocks are at an all-time high, so no surprise to see him get some more financially rewarding offers. But again, it leaves a big gap in Wei. I don't know how well they're going to be able to replace someone like that. And while we still have good aspects, like I think as much as Who Are You and Peppy are the players and Gultak, these are all the biggest names from Wei that they've lost, Ade was still really good. Maka and Lee Min was still a top quality backline, like getting, maybe not competing against the Crazy Raccoon Falcons level of backline, but they were up there around it, right? They were closer to, say, a Finn and Violet backline than any of the other teams we've talked about previously. So I think there's still some good bits for Wei, but I think where I'm sort of picturing them is actually kind of in a tier break, a tier of their own, essentially, where they should be all these teams below them, but they're really going to struggle to repeat some of the results they got in stage 1, where we're able to punch up and upset a lot of teams. They're going to be our tier break team. They're going to be locked into 5th. I think it's going to be quite difficult for them to get into the top 4. Maybe we'll have to wait and see how many last chance qualifier spots are available for Korea. Maybe they just send 2 teams and Wei can go have a chance there anyway. Now for our top 4. There's going to be no surprises that Falcons and Crazy Raccoon, they're going to be towards the top of this list. I'll tell you that for free. But at the bottom of this list, and honestly, it's not even a hot take by now after all the transfers and rumours have been confirmed, Zeta Division are going to be in 4th. I can't see it. In terms of what's happened, you know, Violet was left, kicked, fired. whatever your interpretation is, the result is the same. They've lost one of the best and most flexible main supports in the world, and not only have they lost him, they didn't seem to have a plan. There's no replacement. The plan is Alpha Yi has a crack at it. Now, we did see him play a little bit of main support back in Stage 1 when Violet was sick, I think it was. Missed a week of action. Alpha Yi came in, played some Lucio, played some Ana, and honestly, he did okay. You know, he did okay. The problem is, once we get to the top 4 in Korea, okay isn't going to cut it. Look at the quality of the backlines around you. We'll talk about T1 more later, but they've upgraded their backline a lot. Now, all of a sudden, Finn and Violet aren't just the 3rd best support duo. Finn and Alpha Yi, they might be the 5th best support duo. You know, I'd put Vigilante and Scoot above them. Maka and Lee Soo-min, after how they played in Stage 1, yeah, I think probably above them. We talk about the importance of a good backline, and all of a sudden, Zeta Division, how on earth are you going to start challenging for the 1st and 2nd and these top seeds coming out of Korea? With the 5th best backline in the region? It seems really hard to justify. On the positive for Zeta, they still have a lot of their top quality players. Their DPS line have looked really competitive. I think Flora and Pelican, Flora especially, has had one of these better stages so far since OWCS has started back in Stage 1, and Pelican has been good in the clutch almost every time they've needed him. Meanwhile, on the tag, Bernard has been consistent, a solid performer. I don't think Bernard actually hit the same heights as he did last year, as he did in Stage 1 this year, and obviously, given the situation and the loss of Violet, they really do need Bernard to be in top form this stage if they are to have a hope to still find a way out to that major. They have added Farmer as well to the tank line, obviously requiring 6 players. They add Farmer, and it's kind of a classic second tank move where Farmer in theory rounds out the hero pool of Bernard. We've now got a Winston guy. The problem is, the Winston guy we have previously only really on Vesta Crew, and as we mentioned earlier, Vesta Crew are the team that get beat up the most in Korea, struggle to get map wins, let alone match wins, and Farmer was never really impressive on that team either. Now, there maybe is some form of cope for the Zeta fans of, well, you know, who did look that good on Vesta Crew? They were losing all their games. Maybe Zeta Division have seen something in Farmer that we weren't able to see from the matches that we saw, so maybe there's a level of cope there. But, I don't know, look at his counterparts. Look who he's up against. If he's the Winston guy, he's going to come in and play against Jumbin, someone, Donghak. These are the world's best. So I find it really hard to see a world where the Vesta Crew Winston player ends up challenging these players and going toe-to-toe with them. Maybe it's just a chance to take on a younger player, more experience. A similar model to what they tried to do with Heesung last year as well. So I don't know how much Farmer will really see. Maybe only very specific maps. But I don't think this moves the needle anyway in terms of Zeta Division reclosing that gap with the other elite teams. So honestly, if you're a Zeta Division fan, it might be time to brace yourselves. This is really looking quite rough on paper. Obviously, thanks to Crazy Raccoon winning the Hangzhou Major, there's a real great chance that 4th is actually more than good enough to get you to the last chance qualifier. And as much as we've spoken very negatively about Zeta Division's chances here, once we get to last chance qualifier, don't forget this will be teams like Zeta Division versus the 4th best EMEA team, the 4th best North American team, the 2nd place in Japan, 2nd place in Pacific. You know, these are teams that Zeta Division will still beat, even with Alpha E and Lucio. There's still a lot of quality once we get to the international stage here, so I think there's a real chance that Zeta are actually fine in terms of qualifying for the Esports World Cup. But again, once we get to those bigger matches there and the bigger teams, I just can't see how a team that have struggled to compete consistently with these top 2 teams is going to get any closer after losing Violet and having to move Alpha U onto Lucio. So, yeah, brace yourselves, Zeta Division fans. This could be one of the rougher stages you've experienced. Obviously, if you are a Zeta Division fan, you're probably used to some form of heartbreak by now in terms of always finishing 3rd, often missing out. So, maybe that can help you a little bit. You've experienced hardships before, but this is looking like a really rough one for Zeta Division. Which brings us on to the top 3. I'm actually going to skip all the way to number 1 because I think number 1 is actually the most obvious here. Falcons have made some big money moves. The super team have gotten even more super. We don't know exactly how it all worked out and why someone on Merit were missing for stage 1, but now they're here. But the important thing is, Now they're here. Look at this roster. Remember when Falcons first built this roster all the way back at the start of 2024, and it was like, wow, this super team, they'll never lose, and then Crazy Raccoon actually said, there's actually loads of good players in Korea. We can just build a pretty competitive team out of this. Falcons have gone a step further now. A 7-player roster. Majid has moved more to a content creation and supporting role, making space on the roster for both Someone and Merit to come in. Meaning now, all of a sudden, all the limitations we talked about for Hanbin in Stage 1 as a solo tank, gone. Evaporated. Someone, one of the world's best Winstons, a great Sigma as well. Really good on Zarya, a lot of heroes, huge flexibility. Someone very much has the reputation as the tank that can do it all and will just keep counter-swapping you. Then even on more specific maps, they still have Hanbin to come in to play the Diva role, which is one of Someone's weaker heroes. Junker Queen's still really good for Hanbin as well. So now they have this huge amount of flexibility. Every hero is covered. They might run into some of the issues that we've heard other teams and coaches talk about in terms of having a 7-person roster. Because the bans happen after roster submission, you have to commit if you're putting Hanbin in or someone in. So if you put Hanbin in, maybe you need to protect Diva or you can't get the most out of him. So there is still going to be some of the problems that bigger rosters face for Falcons to overcome, but they've got a pretty stacked lineup to deal with it. Obviously, no changes in the backline. Fielder and Chio can cover everything. The addition of Juno has really rounded out Chio's hero pool to make him more ban-proof as well. So, looking just as solid there. Over on the DPS, Merit joins Proper and Stalker. So, Merit, much more of a traditional hit scan, even though Proper and Stalker have both filled this role multiple times. Merit is more than accomplished. An Overwatch League champion. Everyone knows his talents on hit scan, even if he does have limitations that maybe Proper and Stalker don't have in terms of not being able to play the flex DPS heroes. But I think realistically, I know people are asking questions like, when's Merit going to play? What about, will they suffer from his lack of flexibility? But I think whichever way you break down whichever players are playing, Proper and Merit, Proper and Stalker, Stalker and Merit, every combination of this is outrageous. Every combination is a top tier DPS line. Maybe there are a few ways to exploit Merit when he's in terms of his lack of flexibility. But rare chances, and still, we've seen throughout Stage 1, how many times were you really able to force hit scan out of compositions, out of lobbies? So I don't know how targetable Merit really will be in a lot of these situations. So on paper, this Falcons team, they're just the best. They're just the best, and anything less than first place has to be a disappointment for this caliber of players. Now, in terms of potential drawbacks, we've seen super teams in Overwatch before. We've seen super teams in lots of other games before. We've seen it in traditional sports as well. And what often happens is they don't quite pay off exactly as planned. They don't all gel together properly. You can't quite combine them in the right ways. You can't fit all the talent into one functional roster. You run into issues where you look at all of these players. All of these players are starters. All of these players are top tier players. Most of them Overwatch League champions. They all deserve a starting spot in basically any roster in the world, but they can't all start for Falcons, which means there's going to have to be rotation. People are going to have to balance playtime, both in scrims and in matches. And as a result, Falcons are going to have every starting roster decision scrutinized massively. If it doesn't work, they should have put Stalker in instead of Merit. No, Stalker should be in for these heroes, Proper should be in for these heroes, etc., etc., etc. There's going to be loads of scrutiny on all of that. But I think whatever combination of these 7 players you put in the lobby for Falcons, it's a world-beating roster. It's a championship-quality roster. And if there's any team that can do this, I think it is Falcons. Remember when Falcons first got this super team together back at the start of 2024? And even when they added Smurf and Happy, and there was all these questions of, we got huge personalities here. We got Proper, Fielder, Chio, super established players who have their own way of playing, their own way of thinking about the game. And I think Someone certainly falls into that category as well. A player who is very vocal on his teams, a leader for a lot of these rosters. And now you've got to fit this big personality in with a lot of other big personalities. This is where super teams quite often fall apart. But realistically, Falcons had these problems last year and made it work. And then you look at 9K as their head coach, a player with a huge reputation, a lot of respect of all these players. If anyone can make it work, I think it is Falcons and it is 9K. I think they've made it work with the initial Falcons roster. I'm sure they learned a lot of lessons in terms of how best to put all those pieces together. And I think those lessons will come to the fore here. And I think there's a real chance that Falcons avoid a lot of the super team problems that teams in other games and other sports face. So as a result, they have to be number one. Then we get to our final two teams, Crazy Raccoon and T1. There's not too much to say about Crazy Raccoon. They won the Hangzhou Major. We know this roster in and out. We know their talents. Back over in Hangzhou, well, they did lose to Nightmare, and that really did send ripples around the world of Overwatch in terms of nobody expected that result. Immediately after suffering this embarrassing defeat, they went on and smashed the rest of the competition. They destroyed once again in Dive. Absolutely blew them out of the water. They reclaimed their title as Kings of Clutch, maybe some of those clutches they lost against Nightmare. I mean, they won them all in that final. They beat Falcons 4-2 in the end. Shu claimed MVP, but I think Lip was really robbed a little bit there. It was a vintage top draw major performance from Lip, a huge part of these teams' success through that lower bracket and obviously in the finals themselves. Heesang was good for it in the clutch, obviously winning it out on that Circuit Royale, and all those issues they maybe had against Nightmare where they lost all these 50-50s or clutch moments. The Kings of Clutch returned. They clutched out all the important fights in the final, got themselves another major championship. The caveats for Crazy Raccoon, though, is due to their success, they might be suffering from said success. They've already qualified for the Esports World Cup. Is there a world here where that draws out complacency? Remember last year where they won the Dallas Major and then they won the Esports World Cup? And then Stage 2 in Asia, which was the tournament the second half of the year of 2024. They finished third. They went out in the semi-finals, actually, to Falcons. So there's a bit of how the bracket works out. I think if there is a time for Crazy Raccoon to be complacent or to fall off a little bit, it's probably now. Must be said, Falcons and Crazy Raccoon have proven time and time again, no matter what their form is coming into a major, once it gets to the major itself, they normally always perform at the top level. But when we look at the more regional stuff in terms of Korea and the Asia playoffs, I think this is where we can see Crazy Raccoon maybe slip up, not win, especially with Falcons strengthening their roster, T1 strengthening their roster. I think there's a real world where Crazy Raccoon won't take first place, and honestly, maybe could even slip to third. But let's talk about T1, because this is the decision I've sort of gone back and forth with the most about this second and third. But let's talk about T1, because T1 are probably the team that everyone is most excited about coming into Stage 2. They've obviously got some super talented pieces already on the roster in terms of Donghack and Proud, always the two we talk about. Zest and Viper have been okay options, serviceable on Flex DPS, even if they don't quite enter the proper Stalker, Heesang, Pelican tier of competition. Vigilante has been added to the backline instead of opener. Skewed is going to be moving over into a more of a hybrid, plays for flex support still when they need it, but also plays for main support. We saw him play Lucio in the Soup Cup, and honestly, he looked pretty decent at it. We all know what a world-class Brig he is from his time on the LA Gladiators. So all of a sudden, this T1 backline, which was their weak link in Stage 1, actually looks like one of their strongest links. Now, all of a sudden, you ask me, we talked about Zeta Division's backline slipping down to 5th, maybe in overall rankings. Vigilante and Skewed, I think they're in a strong third place. They're as close as anyone else in the region or in the world is to Crazy Raccoon and Falcons backline. These are two really top quality players. I think we saw more and more of Vigilante in Stage 1, and even in the Soup Cup as well. I think people are about to really see why Vigilante was such a highly rated player, why he was on that Atlanta Reign Season 6 team with all that stat talent. I think we're going to finally see that version of Vigilante on a top team, competing at the highest level, and we'll get to see the best of him here. Partnered with Skewed, it looks really good to me. We have to talk about the Flex DPS because it does feel like the weak link all of a sudden. Proud and Donghack can almost never be the weaklings in their respective role because of their high talent level. Vigilante and Skewed look competitive now with the best backlines in the world. Zest and Viper, I feel like we've not seen the same level of consistency from them. We've not seen them able to step up in these big matches. Again, think back to, say, the Hangzhou Major Final. Heesang steps up in these big moments. We saw Proper step up multiple times at this tournament. We've seen Stalker do it at previous events as well. We talk about Lip for Crazy Raccoon as well. These DPS players, the best players in the world, find a way to step up in the biggest matches of the world. And Zest and Viper have not delivered on that consistently. That's going to be the big difference maker for T1. And if anything, that seems like the thing most likely to hold them back against Crazy Raccoons and Falcons, because Crazy Raccoon and Falcons, every single player on these rosters has the ability to be a match winner. And for T1, everyone except for Zest and Viper does. So it's just, we're splitting hairs, obviously, once we get to the elite teams. But I think there's a lot of reasons to be excited about T1. We've seen two of the players that have been so highly rated, Donghack and Proud, now with a top tier backline to back them up. I think this team is trending very much in the upward direction. If there's a time for T1 to break into that top 2, it is actually right now. Maybe Falcons can't be stopped with this version of the roster, but Crazy Raccoon, there are reasons they can maybe drop off a little bit performance-wise, at least in the regional version of the competition. Once we get to the Esports World Cup, I think it's fair to say, look, it's going to be Falcons, it's going to be Crazy Raccoon again. I think almost impossible to predict against that, based on the historical precedent and the quality of those two rosters we look at. But in the Korea regular season and the Asia playoffs, I think there is a chance right now for T1 to overtake. Do I actually put them above them in the power rankings? I think not. You know, just looking at the quality of the roster, it's really hard to argue that Crazy Raccoon, especially off the back of a Hangzhou Major, aren't still one of the top teams. So I'm gonna put them in this order, which I think is overall, especially the top, the order's probably relatively safe. But I think what's going to be the most exciting bit to watch is, can T1 overtake this Crazy Raccoon in the regular season? And also prove that they're definitely above Zeta Division. While I think everyone expects them to be above Zeta Division, it's no good just everyone expecting you to do it. You have to actually do it when it matters. All this action is going to kick off this weekend. I can show you the opening fixtures here. So we're sort of week 1 all on our left here. So some of the big games we want to sort of pay attention to is obviously Falcons versus T1. Probably two of the two teams that have upgraded the most. So that's going to be a super exciting fixture on Friday. We're also going to see T1 versus Wei, which I think will be a good litmus test for exactly how strong T1 are. Likewise, where was it? Yeah, T1 against Crazy Raccoon on week 2 as well. We're going to get a few more of these tests just to see how good they are. Likewise, Falcons v Zeta. There's a few good games every week here until obviously we get to our conclusion where we do what is tradition at this point in Korea. The final week of regular season, Crazy Raccoon and Falcons go toe-to-toe. So I think a lot of reasons to be excited about Korea in this stage, a lot of interesting storylines. T1 are going to be the most interesting team to watch. This is my final power rankings. I'm pretty happy with them. I don't think there's anything too controversial in here, but I think this is really the moment for T1 to challenge these two elite teams, see if they can get themselves into that top 3, maybe in a more meaningful way than Zeta Division ever really were able to. You know, as much as Zeta Division have always been regarded in the top 3, they've always been regarded as the third team in that top 3. I think T1, this roster's super exciting, and I want to see, can they go a step further than Zeta Division ever did? Can they crack that top 2? Can they do it once it actually gets to the Asia playoffs and stuff like that? And the talent level on this team so high, really excited to see it. I think we'll get some decent scraps in these bottom 4 games as well. You know, it can't always be Falcons v Crazy Raccoon, but we'll get some pretty competitive games in this sort of bottom end of Korea as well. And while we'll still get some mismatches, you know, when like Falcons play Vesta or stuff like that, I think actually the way this is shaping up, it's going to be a very exciting stage 2 over in Korea. These are my power rankings. Let me know if you agree, disagree. Do you think T1 can actually do it? Can they break into that top 2? Can they do it for Korea playoffs? Good chance. Can they do it for Asia playoffs? Harder chance. Can they do it at Esports World Cup? That's the real tough one. That's the real challenge. But lots of reasons to be excited about T1. Definitely tune in. I'll be covering a lot of the action live on my Twitch channel. I will be missing some weeks because I'm getting married. But I'll bring you as much of the action as I can. So stay tuned, follow along. Let me know if you agree with my power rankings below, or if you've got your own rankings, or if you think there's anything I've missed. Thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.